So, welcome on our PC. We have here Windows 10 Enterprise, fully patched and licensed. The only thing what I installed are 3 programs. This is one time Firefox, it is 7-zip and a custom terminal. I'm not so familiar with the CMD or the PowerShell of Windows, so I'm getting more out of the Unix or Linux world, so this is easier for me and easier for you to read if we're using this terminal. The first thing what we will do with our operating system is to install additional add-on from Microsoft. Therefore we're using add and remove programs. Here we use the field optional features, input our administrator credentials. We add a new feature and we search for SSH, and here we have the open SSH client. This one we want to install. This takes a little while. And on the other hand, I have opened our MindSphere tenant, logged in, and I want to show you where you get always the right documentation. And for the installation of the App SDK, you can go to App Management, and on the upper left you have User Documentation. You find all information about the Cinematic Edge, and if we go a little down on the left hand side you see App SDK. You get all informations about the Cinematic Edge App SDK, and here you can find the developer's manual, and this is the manual we used to set up our system for app development. So OpenSSH client is installed correctly. We can check this when we open our terminal, use SSH, and now it's working. You see SSH is working and SCP is also working. This is the 2 programs we will use later. Like we see in the documentation, it is strongly recommended to use Debian 10 Buster. This is a Linux distribution, one of the famous and stablest one. And to use a virtual machine, we need a hypervisor. There are 2 choices what the documentation gives us here. This is one time VMware Player or Virtualbox. For this video tutorial I will use Virtualbox because this is open source and free, and we can download it from the internet, and this is the first thing what we will do now. So we open Firefox and we search for Virtualbox and we get directly to Oracle, and here we can download Virtualbox. We have a host with a Windows operating system, so we choose that one. If you're working on macOS or Linux, you need to change this. So we're using the Windows host, and the download is starting. When it's finished, we get right into the installation. It's finished, so we can open this. The installation of Virtualbox is really straightforward. You can choose the location where you want to install, what desktop icons you want to have. I leave everything as default. Input my administrator credentials and the installation will start. There are some Virtualbox extension packs. You can use this to get more features like support for USB 2, USB 3 devices, boot over Ethernet for Intel cards, and so on. All these extension packs are not open source. In my opinion, you don't need this for an App SDK, but if you want to install the Virtualbox extension packs, you can go to all supported platforms and you can open the download directly with Virtualbox Manager. We will do so. We agree to the license, input our administrator credentials, and the Oracle Farm Virtualbox extension packs was successfully installed. Okay, The next thing what we need is ISO of Debian 10, or also called Buster. In the documentation we see here a link where we can download this file. We copy this link and open a new tab. Here you find the download of these ISO files with all different graphical interfaces. In the documentation they use LXDE. This is this ISO file. I downloaded this already because it takes a while. It's 2.2 GB up to your internet connection. It can be faster or slower. Okay, so because we downloaded this ISO file, we are ready to set up our first virtual machine. Just finish the last installation screen from Virtualbox. And to do so, we open Virtualbox and we have a button New. This is the button we want to use, and we need to give the name for our virtual machine. Call it App SDK Development. Now we need to choose what kind of operating system we want to install as a virtual machine. In our time it's Linux, and the distribution is Debian 46-bit. Okay, next we can choose with the memory size what we want to give to our virtual machine. My host system has 32 GB of RAM, but for a Linux system 8 GB are really enough. Go next. Now we talk about the hard disk, what we want to attach to our virtual machine. We leave here everything like default. Only the size we want to change a little bit because 8 GB is a little small. I choose 40 GB. Here you can choose where the file should store, so take care that at this location you have enough space to save the virtual hard drive. We click create, and now the template or the virtual machine is made. But we need to change some settings, so therefore we go to settings. And now we go from the top to the bottom. In general, we don't need to change anything, but in systems, we change to processors. And here we give our virtual machine 4 cores. You see here my host system has 12 cores. So it's up to your hardware where you run Virtualbox, how many CPU cores you add to your virtual machine. But never go over 50% because then your host system gets slow. We go to display because we're using graphical Linux. We give a little bit more video memory and we enable the 3D acceleration. In storage, we see here our hard drive, what we add before. And here we see the virtual CD-ROM drive. And into this virtual CD-ROM drive, we need to mount our ISO file. So we're using the small CD icon here, choose a disk file, go to your downloads folder, and here we choose the ISO file for Debian 10, click on open, and now it's mounted into our virtual or into our CD-ROM. Audio, no need. Network, you have 2 choices. You can choose NAT. Then the communication is possible between your host system and your virtual machine. If you want to program from somewhere else in your corporate network or in your home net, then you can choose bridged. And in this area, choose the network card of your host system. I'm using here the cable network of this PC, so this is the Intel network card. Here you see the wireless card, so please take care that you choose the right network card of your host system in this field. Serial ports, USB shared folders, user interface doesn't matter for this virtual machine. We click OK, and now all settings are done, and we can start our virtual machine the first time. And Virtualbox will ask us if we want to start from our virtual CD-ROM. This is exactly what we want to do, so we click Start. move this a little bit. Maybe we can make it a little bit bigger, centered. And we get greeted with a screen, and if we click into the screen, Virtualbox tells us that our cursor gets captured by this screen, and if we want to release this mouse, then we're using this shortcut here. Okay. So we're using the Debian installer, same like written in the documentation. And after a short while, we get the installer. We close this message up here. This will disappear later when we install the guest extensions. Choose the language for your installation. I choose English. Select your location. Zambia, no, I choose other. I choose other. Europe. And Germany. This is because of time zones. Now we are for our locals. So here we can use the United States, that's fine. For our keyboard, I use German. You choose your keyboard type, of course. And now some additional components were loaded, what we need for the installation, network drivers, partition programs, and so on. This takes a short while. And if this is done, the network card will boot up and try to getting an IP address. If you're getting an error here, please double check if you choose the right card for your network, so that you choose the cabled or wireless network card of your host system. Next question from the installer is what should be the host name of your Linux machine. That will be call it App Sdk. Please don't use underscores here, only minus, because this is necessary for a host name. Go continue. You can input the domain name if you want or if you have, but you can leave it blank. Also, we can choose dex-world.com. Continue. And now setup will ask us for the root password. Root user is similar to the administrator of a Windows system, so take a strong password. You need it sometimes, but don't make it too easy. Always input 2 times. And now we are talking about the normal user without root privileges. And give it a name, and I input my name now. And the login name and the password for this normal user. Later we will always work as the normal user, only for the setup of the virtual machine we need the root user sometimes, but in most cases we are working with the standard user. We continue this. And now we're getting to the hard disks after a little while. We want to use the entire disk. We only attach one disk before when we set up the virtual machine with Virtualbox. So we choose that one. I prefer to use 2 partitions, so one for the system and one for the home partition. This is better because if your home partition gets full because you run a lot of Docker files, then the main system is still running and don't run out of space. Now you see the details of the partitioning of the hard disk. I'm fine with this, so I say finish and say yes, write these partitions to my disk. And the installation will start. This takes a while up to the power of your host system and your internet connection. And I will speed up the video now a little bit, and when it's finished, we hear us again. Installation is done. Now the setup assistant asks us if we want to use a network mirror, because all the packages what we installed at the moment were stored on the ISO file. But for further updates or installation of other software, we need a network mirror, so that's the reason why we choose yes. Now choose one of the mirrors what's near to you so that the internet connection is as fast as possible. In my time it's Germany. Here you have a lot of different repository servers in your country. I choose the default one. In my situation I don't have a proxy, so I don't input one. And now the repository is checked for every file what is stored. And now it's time to insert our bootloader. In this time it's group. Yes, we want to install a master boot record. We choose our first hard drive. We only have one, so it's dev SDA. And the bootloader gets installed. We are nearly finished with the installation. Some post works will be done now. I speed up the video a little bit and we hear us again when we are finished. Okay, installation is done and the server is rebooting from the first hard drive. So this is the first time we boot up our Debian Buster Linux now. After a while it should greet us with the login screen that we see here, and we log in with our predefined user from the setup wizard. And we get into the graphical interface. The first thing what we will do here now is we open a terminal, LX terminal, and this time get a little bit bigger. And what we will do now here is we getting root. To get root we use the command su followed by the root password. You remember this was the first password what you input in the setup wizard. And now we are the user root, so same like administrator in Windows, so we can do everything with the user root, so please be careful what you do. And the first thing what we want to do is we want to install the guest extensions. These are drivers from Virtualbox. And to do so we use devices insert guest additions CD image. This takes a little bit, and if we're getting this message we can cancel this. And we change the directory with SD to media CD-ROM, and we list everything what's in this directory, and we see here this is the everything what's inside or on this virtual CD. And to run the installation of the guest extensions for Linux we use sh:/vbox Linux edition run. And the installation starting. I think what we want to do is we want to access our virtual machine from our host system so that we can make easier copy paste and we have a bigger screen to use. Therefore we install another package, and to install a package we first update our repositories. This we do with the root user with the command apt-get update. That's done. And to install a new package we use install, and we want to install OpenSSH-server. Yes, we want to install. And the installation is done. What we do now is to update our wheel system. Therefore, we use apt-get dist-upgrade. There are a lot of packages what needs to be upgraded, around about 600 megabytes up to your internet speed. It takes a little bit. I start the update now, and when it's finished, we hear us again. Now we are done. After the update is successful, we restart our operating system. Therefore, we use the graphical interface and say reboot. And when the reboot is done, we have a fully patched, up-to-date Debian busted 10. And we can move on with the installation of our development environment. Okay, that's done. We can use our logins to log into our virtual machine. And if this is done, we use again the terminal to figure out our IP address. We have here an IP address 192.168.11.38. And now it's the first time we use our terminal in our host system. You can use, like I told you, any terminal you like, CMD, PowerShell, or any other terminal. And we use SSH followed by our username of our virtual machine, then the @ symbol and the IP address of our virtual machine, what we figured out here with the command IP space A, and it's 11.38. That was wrong. It's a comma, needs to be a point. And because this is the first time we connect to this virtual machine, it tells us is fingerprint, and this fingerprint will be stored on the host system. And every time when you connect to this virtual machine, it gets cross-checked, and if something is changed or there is a man in the middle, you will see that this fingerprint is changed, this warning or this information is showed again, and you need to be aware that there's something changed. So for now, we trust and we input our password, and now we are on our Linux virtual machine. That means we can close this, and we need to do a little change because there's a small bug in Debian busted 10. Normally you use the command shutdown to restart or shut down your server, but we can't find this command here with help. To fix this, we use our favorite editor, Vim, Nano, whatever you like, to edit a file. First we getting root, and we edit the file in the user root.bashrc. And on the very bottom, we input the following line. All commands what I use here you find in the video description. So we save this, exit out again, and log in again to our server. Getting root. And now we have also the command shutdown, add user group, and all the commands what we are missing before we can use now. Okay. So we have an updated system now. The next thing what we want to do is we want to check if our Virtualbox guest extensions what we installed before are running. Therefore we're using this command. And after we press enter and you get an output like this, means that the Virtualbox guest extensions are running. This number can be different at your site, but if you don't get anything, that's something with the guest extension installation goes wrong. Okay, If we go back to the main documentation, what we get from the MindSphere, we see here installing the guest extensions, and the next step is installing Docker. You are pointed here to the official documentation of the Docker community. We don't open this here. I think you followed me step by step to get Docker running. The thing is, we need to install some dependencies, what we need later. Like I told you before, all commands you find in the video description. We say yes, we want to install these dependencies. And the next thing is we need to download a key to verify the packages, what we get later from Docker. Therefore, we're using this command. Press enter, and we input the new repository for the Docker packages into our system with this long command. If this is done, we need to update again our repositories. Apt-get update, and now you see we not only updating the Debian repositories, we also updating these Docker repositories. And to install Docker, there's also command. And to install Docker, we're using again apt-get install and then 3 packages: Docker Community Edition, Docker Community Edition CLI, and Container ID. We say yes, and we want to install. This is not much, should be fast. Up to your internet connection and the power of your host system. And if this is done, we install Docker. But there are some post-installation requirements, because if we exit the root user and working as our normal user and try to run a Docker command, we see that we don't have permissions to run Docker because our user don't have permissions. So you have 2 choices now. You can run Docker as root, what is definitely not the right choice. The right thing what we need to do is we getting back to root, and we check if we have a group called Docker. This we can check we use group at Docker, and system tells us that the group Docker already exists. I clear the screen so it's easier for you to follow. And what we will do now is we want to add our user Skybot to the group Docker. Therefore, we use user mod to make user modifications. Minus small letter A, big letter G for group, Docker, and your username. That's done. And if we exit out now and exit out from the server and log in back to the server with our normal user Skybot, like you see there, clear the screen and run the Docker command again, you see we don't getting this error message, and the Docker hello world from Docker is running as normal user without root privileges. Okay, this was Docker, but if we read in the documentation, we also need the binary Docker Compose. To install Docker Compose, it's quite easy. You can read on their official website. This is only 2 commands. The first thing is we're using curl to download from GitHub Docker the binary and store the binary in our user local bin folder. We run this command. We're getting an error because we don't have permissions to write into the user local bin. We need to be root to do this. Run this command again. And now the download succeeded. And if we change into user local bin and list all files, we see there's a Docker Compose file. And if we use ls-la, we see more information. And what is missing is that this binary at the moment is not able to execute because we missing the X here. This is quite easy. We're using chmod +X because we want to add the execution flag to the Docker Compose file. Enter and check again. And now we see we can execute this file. So we exit root user, use docker -compose -version to check if we can execute, and we get the message back from Docker Compose which version it is, and that means that the installation of Docker and Docker Compose is done. Okay, now to the App SDK. Back on our MindSphere, we go back to the main screen or the dashboard. And if we are there, we're using the app publishing. And on the upper left corner, you see App SDK packages. And if we click on this, you see a lot of version. At the moment when I record this video, App SDK 3.4.0 is the newest version. We open the small error and there we have the dev environment for Linux. We download this file and store it in our downloads folder. And if this is done, we can have a look. Downloads, here it is. But we need to move this file onto our virtual machine. And therefore we open and now therefore first we check where we are. Always you can check the folder where you are with the pwd command, and at the moment we are in our home folder, home skybot. Inside there we make a new folder with mk directory and we call it app-sdk-install. We change into this folder, check with pwd again in which folder we are, and to make life easier we copy this and we open a new terminal. Now we are on our host Windows system. We change over to downloads and we check. Here we have the App SDK file. So now we're using the scp command, call the file we want to copy. And now same like when you connect with SSH to your server, you use the same syntax. Username at 192.168.11. I forgot already. 38. We can check IP-IPA. It is 1138. Followed by a double point. And then the folder where you want to copy the file. So that command, it at all means copy this file to this server, to this folder on this server. So we press enter, input our password, and the file is copied to the server. We can check here also ls, and here we see the file. And if you want to see it in graphics, we can also change over to our virtual machine, open the Explorer in Linux, and here you see the file. We can unzip this file here, but we want to do everything or most in our terminal. So we're using tar-xzf and the file name to untar this file. And if we check now, we have now the main tar file, a new folder, and the file called install.sh. Sounds good. We can try to execute the install.sh, but we see permission denied most of the time. That means we need to be user root and run the install.sh again, and everything what's necessary for the Cinemeric Edge App SDK will be installed now. This takes a little bit and we hear us again when it's finished. Installation is done. And to check if the installation works well, we can go back to our documentation, and here it's written create your first project. So that means we go back from root and use App SDK followed by init. And this is working, but to make our first program or app will be a part of our next video. We set up now our virtual environment to start with app programming very well. Last thing what I want to show you is how we can connect our editor to our virtual machine. Of course, you can work inside this virtual machine, but it's very hard to get files inside, outside, copy, paste. So I like more to minimize this and connect from my host system with my editor directly to my virtual machine. Therefore, I prefer Visual Studio Code. So we search for this. This is also open source and from Microsoft, so we download this, save this file, and run the installation. Accept the license, but where we want to install. Create a desktop icon, install, and launch Visual Studio Code. What you see here now is on your host computer, so on your Windows machine. This is not what we want. We want to install some extensions. The first thing what we need is the Python extension, because this is the programming language what we will use in our next tutorial, and the extensions remote-ssh. This one we also want to, or we need to install. And after the installation, we can use the key F1 to add a new SSH host to our Visual Studio Code. This is what we want to do now. And here you see an example. This is the same like we used before in our terminal. So that means SSH skybot at 192.168.11.38. I missed the at. Right. Press enter. We want to store this information in our home folder. And if this is done, we can use the F1 key again and say we want to connect to a host. We choose the host what we input a minute before. A new file will be opened, or a new window will be opened from Visual Studio Code. And one time you get a message from the Windows Defender Firewall. We allow the access because we know what happened. Now Visual Studio is asking us what is the remote host using operating system. Is it Linux, Windows or macOS? We know it's Linux. We enter our password. Close this window. And now Visual Studio Code is setting up an SSH connection directly to our Linux server. And can make it a little bigger so you see better. If we go on Files, you can see Connect to Remote. We open this. And now we are jumped directly to our home folder on our Linux server, not on our host system. And we can choose that we want to jump into, for example, Documents. We say OK. Input our password one time again. We trust the other side, yes. And now we are in our Documents folder on our virtual machine. So you can program in your host system without any concern about resolution, copy paste or whatever. So if we make a new file here called test.py for a Python file, and what we make standard print hello world. We save this. I can show you now also here. If we go back to our virtual machine and we go into Documents, you see here our new file. So let's close this again. And it would be nice if we can run this Python file directly from our host system inside the virtual machine, no problem. Only move up from the bottom and you directly getting an SSH connection onto your virtual machine. And here we can use Python 3 test.py, and we can run our Python programs on our virtual machine from our host system in an easy way. I think this was enough for this video tutorial. We set up a virtual machine with all dependencies, what we need to start with app programming. I hope you enjoyed this video and we see us in the next part.